Good evening, and welcome to this virtual public information open house for the I-285 Westside Express Lanes project. I'm Shane Blatt, your moderator for tonight's event. On behalf of the Georgia Department of Transportation, thank you for joining us. The purpose of tonight's session is to provide you with an opportunity to learn more about the I-285 Westside Express Lanes project and ask questions of our designated subject matter experts. Keep in mind that the concept for the project corridor is not yet final, so the information presented this evening is subject to change. One of the big ways you can make your voice heard is by submitting comments about the project, and we'll explain the ways you can do that during this session. Next slide, please. This is a 2-hour virtual open house. As such, we have a few ground rules to ensure we maximize your time and answer your questions accurately and thoughtfully. We will start this virtual open house with a Georgia DOT video presentation. During this session, you will be on mute to reduce background noise. However, throughout the session, you could submit questions using the Microsoft Teams live Q&A feature. We urge you to keep your questions concise, language appropriate, and specific to this project. For information about other projects that fall within Georgia DOT's Major Mobility Investment Program, please visit www.majormobilitygA.com. After the presentation, I will read questions for the project team to respond to. Keep in mind that we may group similar questions together. If we don't get to your question, or your question involves a more detailed technical response than we're able to provide during this time frame, don't worry. We will address your question within 48 hours or through our comment response letter. But keep in mind that if you use the option to ask a question anonymously and we don't get to your question during the live session, then we won't have a way to contact you afterward. So please provide your name when submitting a question. You may start submitting questions during the video presentation. However, we will not see your question. You will not see your question in the chat box right away. We will begin adding questions to the chat box and answering those questions one at a time after the presentation. Also, you may receive a private response depending on the question asked. And again, if we don't get to your question tonight, we will answer it within 48 hours or through our comment response letter. Please note that all questions submitted will be part of the live public record. Because this is a virtual open house, it's important that you're tethered to a strong Wi-Fi or reliable wired connection. But if you get disconnected, you can always log back into the session. A recording of this session will be posted on the website listed below by Thursday, February 18th. If there are any elected officials joining us tonight, please send us your name and office in the chat for our records. This platform provides closed captioning. Click on the 3 dots if you wish to select closed captioning. You can choose among multiple languages. For our Spanish-speaking communities, we have a dedicated hotline available at 470-588-0276. A member of the project team who speaks Spanish is ready to receive your questions through voicemail. Just be sure to leave your full name, phone number, email, and question. Also, don't worry about memorizing these tips. We will repeat them later in the session. For now, we will start with a video presentation featuring Tim Matthews, Program Manager for Georgia DOT's Major Mobility Investment Program. Tim has worked in a variety of engineering and project management roles for Georgia DOT over the past 15 years, overseeing hundreds of projects varying in size and scope. His video presentation will provide an overview of the program, offer specifics about the I-285 Westside Express Lanes project, and give you a few suggestions on how to navigate the virtual website and submit comments. Let's begin the video presentation now.
Good evening. Again, I would like to welcome you to this virtual PIOH, or Public Information Open House, this evening. My name is Tim Matthews. I'm the Major Mobility Investment Program Manager, and I will be presenting on the Westside Express Lane project tonight for you, and I will answer questions after the presentation. So good evening and welcome again. So this project is not just a standalone project. This project does belong in the Major Mobility Investment Program. The MMIP is what we call it. And as you can see on the screen, we have several projects in this program, ranging from interstate widening projects to interchange improvement projects to the express lanes that we'll talk about this evening on the west side of 285. There's also several advanced improvement projects that include bridge replacements, railroad replacements, etc., that we will be bringing forth in this program as well, several of which do fall within the I-285 Westside Express Lane project. So what you see on the screen here are the project locations. It tells you where the projects are located in the metro area, and most of them are in the metro area, with several that are down in Savannah as well as Macon. The I-285 Westside Express Lane project, you can see on the screen on the left-hand side in purple there, starts at I-20 on the west side and travels all the way up to Paces Ferry Road, just south of I-75. And later we'll give you a more description of that project as we move forward. Now, the Georgia Express Lanes is not unique to Georgia. We do have a history of those. Our first project, I-85, was opened several years ago, and we've opened several more in the past few years as well. So the history started back in 2000 with our HOV system plan. We wanted to find ways to manage and mitigate congestion on our most congested corridors. And we thought the HOV system would work. And we found during that study that most folks still do not want to get out of their cars or carpool. So what we've done is we moved forward with a study on I-285 in 2006 that looked at alternatives, including transit, bus rapid transit, as well as general purpose widening and express lanes. And out of that, in 2007, the Atlanta Regional Commission, as well as the Georgia DOT Board, adopted express lanes as the strategy to mitigate congestion in the metro area. We moved forward in 2009 with the Managed Lane System Plan that was adopted. That plan outlines the system that we wanted to bring forward in the MMIP program. In 2011, we opened to traffic our first express lane on I-85. Now that's a hot lane is what we call it, because we converted a general purpose lane to express lanes. We're not doing that on I-285 or the other express lane projects. In 2015, we brought forward the Managed Lane Implementation Plan, again setting the rules and policies for express lanes in Georgia. And in 2016, then Governor Dl announced the Major Mobility Investment Program, which are the projects you saw on the previous few slides. In 2017, we opened the I-75 Metro South Express Lanes, and in 2018, we opened the I-85 Express Lane Extension, as well as the Northwest Corridor Express Lanes on 575 and 75 in Cobb, Cherokee County. So some of the success we're going to build on from the Northwest Corridor project. Those of you who ride that corridor can see benefits on day one. Rush hour has been reduced by more than an hour, both morning and in the evenings. We've had well over 10 million trips. First year trips were 7.2 million. So people love the express lanes, to be honest with you. They want to use them because they get the reliable trip times they're looking for. Travel speeds are 20% faster than the express lanes, than the general purpose lanes. And the average daily fare is about $2.32. And that depends on the congestion in the express lanes or the speeds on the express lanes. The express bus service, day one, which is a transit service provider, saw great benefit. They actually were getting to their destinations about 15 minutes too early because they had reliable trip time. So they had to adjust their schedules so that they wouldn't arrive too early based on their scheduled timeframes. But one thing we didn't realize when we were opening the Northwest Corridor Express Lane project is that the general purpose lanes actually received the benefit as well. The general purpose lane speeds are up by about 20 miles per hour morning and afternoon. So that's a huge benefit for folks who choose not to get into the express lanes. Now you're still going to get faster travel speeds in the express lanes over GP, but you do see a benefit on the GP lanes as well. So great reward for everyone. How does it work? The express lanes work very simply by the more cars are in the express lanes, the slower the speed, the higher the price. The toll increases when there's more congestion, more cars, and it decreases when there's less congestion. And that is managed by CERTA, which we'll talk about later. This type of pricing model, drivers experience more reliable trip times, again, because we manage the demand in the corridor. It is also a great benefit, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, for public transit, because public transit service providers do not have to pay to get into the express lane system, such as MARTA or Express Bus Service or Cobb Link or Gwinnett's transit service providers. Now you do have to pay to get into those services, but you do not have to pay a second charge to get into the express lanes. And those also include registered van pools, emergency vehicles, as well. And one thing to note is no trucks are allowed in the express lanes, giving us that benefit of reduced congestion. Now, we don't do it alone here at GDOT. We have several partners that are key to bringing these projects and programs forward. We have what we call an integrated mobility solution partnership that includes GDOT, the ATL, and State Road and Tollway Authority. GDOT's responsibilities is to get the project ready for construction, all that pre-letting activity, the procurement, the bringing a developer on board, project management, operations such as TMC, Traffic Management Center, the HERO units you see on the roadways, as well as maintaining the maintenance of the roadway, snow and ice, etc. State Road and Tollway Authority are responsible for the tolling and operations of the facility during the opening of the roadway. They also contract with the developer. We at GDOT cannot hold a contract without having all the funding in place. So they are actually the conduit for us to bring these projects forward. They make payments to the developer and again, retains the tolling operations for the project moving forward. But we also have other partners such as the ATL, MARTA, and Express Bus Service, again, helping us understand what the benefits to their service providers are as we bring express lanes in the future. So moving on to the I-285 Westside Express Lane project itself and how it works. Really, the life of a project, as you see on the screen here, starts with the initiation and planning of the project. That's where we announce the MMIP program and the list of projects that fall within that umbrella. Where we're at today is in project development, as you can see highlighted in the red box on the screen. This is where we bring the concept forward, the design 30% costing plan is what we call it. We conduct a public information open house, which is what we're here this evening to give you an idea of what's going on with the project, and most importantly, to get the feedback you need so that we can have to make the best decision possible. We are also acquiring early right-of-way acquisition on the project, but our most important document that helps us move the project forward is the environmental document. We have to have that document and the studies that are involved in that approved before we can go to construction. And there you can see the several steps following the project development phase, such as construction, where the developer builds the project, operations, when we open it to traffic and you get the benefit of reliable trip times, tolling operations, etc., and then obviously maintenance of the roadway. So a lot goes on in the life of the project as we know it. As you can see on the screen here, you get an idea of the project limits. You can see on the right-hand side, I-285. You can see I-20 on the south side there, and I-75. And the project starts there at Donnelly Hollowell Parkway, and it goes north with one express lane in each direction, all the way up to Paces Ferry. We have on the screen also here our access points where you can get in and out of the system. There's two different types of access points on the corridor. Those that are express lane interchanges or dedicated interchanges for express lane only. And then also express lane merge where you can merge in and out of the system on 285 to get into the express lanes. The project limits are about 6.5 miles in length, and the connections tie into the I-285 top end Westside Express Lane. So once we open all the MMIP projects on 285, you'll have a complete connected system of express lanes from I-20 all the way on the west, all the way around to I-20 on the east, up State Route 400, up 85, and up 75 with Northwest Corridor. What you see on the screen here is a typical section or a cross section. If you were to cut a slice out of 285 and look in, you would see these lane configurations. What we are doing for this project is we're adding a new lane on the outside or widening to the outside one lane, and then we're going to repurpose the inside lane for express lanes. That way you don't remove any existing lanes that are out there. We're not taking the lane away like they did on I-85 hot lane, which is a different concept altogether. So thereby you get the same number of lanes for general purpose users, but you do get the added express lanes for folks who choose to get into the system. And this highlights what that would look like. So what is the main purpose of the project? Obviously, our goal for MMIP and the express lanes is to provide reliable trip times for users who you choose to get into the system, as well as transit service providers. It also improves regional connectivity. As I mentioned, this will be a complete connected system on 285, 75, 85, and 400. So you'll see that regional connectivity and the improvement that it brings to the metro area. And the way we're doing this is through what we call accelerated project delivery, or design build finance, and design build finance maintain type of delivery methods. This way it allows us to bring the project forward, get it open to traffic, and then you guys can see the benefits earlier versus waiting 10, 15, 20 years down the line to get that project open. Here's some more benefits, just kind of highlighting what these express lanes bring: reliable trip times, consistent travel speeds, and increased transit options and opportunities, such as the express bus service and Cobb Link and the like. Where are we at in the timeline for this project itself? You can see a lot has happened already starting in 2019. Right now we're in Q1 or Q1 of 2021, where we're having this public information open house. And this is where as our first opportunity to reach out to the public, such as yourselves, to get the feedback so we can make the best decisions possible moving forward on the project. But that's not all of the public information outreach that we do. We're going to do continuous outreach with you, the stakeholders, cities, counties, CIDs, and the like, to again make those decisions we need on the project. Starting in Q1 of 2022, we'll have a public hearing open house, which is very similar to what we're having here, hopefully in person by then. But that's where you have the environmental draft document on hand so you can see what's going on with the studies. We expect the approval of the environmental document in Q4 or late 2022, getting the procurement or bringing a developer on board in 2023, with construction starting in 2026 and open to traffic in 2032. So a lot more to do, but starting here this evening, we look for that feedback from you today. So the I-285 Westside Express Lanes design and traffic analysis, we also look at as we build the concepts and the initial costing plans or initial design of the project. I won't read everything on the screen here, but there's several things that we have to look at, such as what are the impacts on this corridor that we have to design around? What are the right-of-way impacts, the environmental impacts, and so on and so forth. Also, traffic analysis goes into this as well. As you can see on the screen here, the existing annual average daily traffic is about 180,000 vehicles, which is a little bit less than some of our other corridors, but that's quite a bit of traffic on this roadway. And you can see it on a daily basis when you're traveling on 285 that it is congestion. By 2052, we expect the increase of traffic to be about 258,000 vehicles. So you can see a substantial increase in 2052. Now, we designed these projects looking at today's traffic numbers, and we project those out 20 years to get an understanding based on the open to traffic. So open to traffic 2032, forecast that out 20 years from then, give us a 2052 forecast of 258,000 vehicles. All the while, we believe these express lanes are going to give you that additional 15 minutes of average daily travel time savings on this 8-mile trip. The environmental process and analysis that goes into that, we follow the National Environmental Policy Act, called the NEPA process. That's that document I mentioned earlier that we have to get approved before we can go to construction. It determines how the project should be developed for public use. It really outlines, based on the impacts this project brings and the benefits it brings, quite frankly, on how we set the course for getting this project to construction and open to traffic. The environmental impacts are factored into the design and the decisions we make on the project, not only in pre-let, but also after in construction as well. And we conduct public meetings to allow general public and stakeholders to provide those comments that we need to make those decisions that I mentioned earlier. So the environmental findings, called the environmental approval process, there's several studies that they look at, ecology, history, archaeology, are just a few that are in that study. Also public involvement, what are we hearing from the public and the stakeholders on the corridor as their impacts. Key resources are identified along the corridor, such as waters of the US or wetlands, streams. There's also some potential for residential displacements. Not every project is clean. We have to come through and look at the impacts, and sometimes we need a little bit of right of way, and sometimes we need the whole parcel and may cause a displacement. But there's a pretty in-depth process that we'll talk about later on right of way acquisition. Utility conflicts and natural gas pipelines near Atlanta Road. So there's utility conflicts that we have to deal with, as well as many other things. All the while bringing the National Environmental Policy Act document, or NEPA document, forward to approval that gets us to construction. We also have identified on this project during the concept development phase that there's a need for a detour. The best way to replace a bridge over a busy interstate is to get it done as quickly as possible. So we believe if we close Orchard Road and replace that bridge with a detour, we're able to get in and out quickly. That way it reduces impact to the traveling public. What we're presenting here on the screen is a detour. As we close Orchard Road, you'll be able to still access across 285 using Cumberland Parkway, Paces Ferry Road, and Orchard Road itself. It's about a 2-mile detour, which is not significant in the realm of a detour, but again, it helps us get the project moving faster and get that bridge replaced as quickly as possible. As I mentioned earlier, there are several advanced improvement projects that are really a small piece of the bigger express lane project that we're going to bring forth early and get those open to traffic, because they help us with maintenance of traffic during construction, and it helps getting those roadways open, so it eases the burden of construction during that period of time. What you see on the screen here are the projects that we're going to bring forward early, highlighted there in the red boxes, and that's going to be a series of bridges over 285, 1 CSX Railroad and Norfolk Southern Railroad Bridge, as well as South Cobb Drive Bridge, Bolton Road, and Dl Hollowell Parkway over 285. These are all bridges that we're going to replace as a part of advanced improvement project, which will be done early before the bigger project comes forward. The environmental studies are underway on these projects, and we expect procurement to start in the next year or so. Here's the schedule for that. 2021, as a part of this project here, we're bringing to the public what we're doing on the advanced improvement project so we can get feedback. Procurement starts our first quarter of next year. We'll have a public hearing open house next year, bringing this project procurement forward with environmental approval in late 2022, construction starting in 2023 for each of the projects, and ending in 2026. So you'll see those projects will be open to traffic before we get started on the bigger express lane project. So public stakeholder involvement, that's what we're here for this evening, to get that feedback from you. We've had several virtual public information open houses last year with State Route 400, and also last year with the I-285, I-20 interchange on the east side. So similar to that, we're following in the footsteps of the program we move forward with virtual settings. We've held virtual settings like this. We've held some in-person, limited on the PIOH forum, where we had some outside public hearing open houses, social distance, of course. Hopefully this time next year when we have a PIOH, we'll be able to come back together in person. But we've done many stakeholder outreach briefings with stakeholders on the corridor, starting back in 2019 all the way to 2020, 2021. You can see on the screen all the icons of all the stakeholders that we've met with, and sometimes met with 4, 5, 6 times or more, depending on what they were looking for from an information perspective. Cobb, Fulton County cities, school districts, we met with the school districts, CIDs, community groups, some homeowner associations, chambers of commerce. We've met with trade associations, social service organizations, as well as research groups on the corridor, so we can get an understanding of what this project's going to do for them, both benefit-wise and impact-wise. So the public information open house website, this is a website that we developed where you can get all the information we have available to date in front of you. So you can see what's going on with the project, how it may impact you, how it will benefit you, and hopefully answer some of the questions that you may have along the process. This opening slide here is the website that you can find the information, majormobilityga.com/project/Westside. You can find information about this project and all the rest of the projects in the MMIP program that we have listed on there. Once you enter into the project, you'll get a visualization of the project where you can see a video of, or fly-through view of what the project would look like. Here, I will start the video so you can see the fly-through of what it would look like on 285 for express lanes. And this is obviously not the final layout. This is a general concept as we know it today. Here, starting from south to north on the right, you can see I-285 and Donnelly Hollowell Parkway. The express lanes start here in the fuchsia color there in the center, with one express lane in each direction. And we'll travel north with you, and I'll kind of tell you what's going on the corridor. So here we're starting to approach our first advanced improvement project, which is Bolton Road Bridge replacement. This bridge has to be replaced to fit the express lanes underneath. Here, continuing north on I-285, you can see several bridge widenings. Here's the Chattahoochee River Bridge widening. Continuing north, approaching South Cobb Drive, you'll see a Norfolk Southern Railroad bridge widening here. This is where I-285 is over Norfolk Southern Railroad. Here, approaching South Cobb Drive. Again, this bridge has to be replaced because express lanes will not fit underneath. Traveling north on 285, you'll see another bridge widening on 285 over Church Road. Moving north as we approach Atlanta Road. CSX Railroad underneath 285. Here's Atlanta Road. We're going to retain this bridge. It does not need to be replaced. Here's you'll start to see our first express lane interchange or access point at Cumberland Parkway. This is a north-facing ramps only, so you can access the express lanes going north and traveling south to Cumberland Parkway. Now this is express lane access only, so no general purpose access to 285 here. Traveling north, you can see the ramps down from the access point to tie you back into 285 express lanes. Going under Orchard Road, which is a bridge replacement. Here, approaching Paces Ferry Road. This bridge is retained. We do not have to replace that bridge. Moving north to our next access point or interchange on the corridor. You can see this access point takes you up to Mount Wilkinson Parkway. We're able to enter the express lanes going south and traveling north to Mount Wilkinson Parkway. Again, this is an express lane only interchange. No general purpose traffic can enter the 285 corridor from here. And that concludes the video. So you can also look at roll plots or concept drawings on our website. Again, at that same website I mentioned earlier, majormobilityga.com/project/Westside. You'll be able to see a layout like you see on the screen here, and you'll see the whole entire corridor if you go to that website moving forward. We also have several other things on the website that you can view. We have a welcome video from our GDOT spokesperson, Natalie Dell, that kind of tees up the website and what you'll be able to see and what this project's about. We also are able to translate to any language on the website. So if you need a different language other than English, you'll be able to click a button called Translate on there, and that will translate the website into whatever language you're looking for. There are many virtual rooms, is what we're calling it, for the environmental process, such as air and noise, impacts, maps, facts, and many other documentation that we have available today. We also have information on the advanced improvement projects, those bridges I was talking about earlier, including detours and layouts. And we also have a room or a video that you can learn more about the right-of-way acquisition process. If you see that your property is impacted by the project, this video and information on that site will help you understand what the process is for acquisition or purchasing of right-of-way. And this next slide here shows you a booklet, which is on that website as well, where you can learn more about property acquisition, what happens in the process, the timelines, etc., and then the video, as I mentioned earlier. But most importantly, what we have on the website and what you'll find today access to is that comment sheet where we were looking for comments from you. Again, that information so we can make the best decision possible on these projects. You'll see the roll plots, the handouts, fact sheets, comment cards. You can electronically submit those comment cards and view the fact sheets, or you can mail those back in if you choose to do that and fill it out at a later date. You can mail those to the addresses on the screen here, to the State Location Bureau or the Georgia DOT District 7 office. We also have these displays on site in person at the District 7 office for you to view. There will be no persons there, no one to help you go through the layout because of the situation we're in with COVID, but you will be able to personally go in and visit that. To do so, you must reach out to District 7 representatives to make that happen. If you also have disabilities looking at these formats, you can contact Joshua Higgins at the number on the screen here to get more information there. Opportunities to submit comments. You can leave the comments on the virtual platform with the link that I mentioned earlier. You can email those comments in and scan images to the website or email address you see on the screen. You can call in and leave a voicemail on the hotline, or you can mail those comments in to our State Environmental Administrator at the address shown here. It's important to remember that the comment period for this Public Information Open House is open until February 22nd, 2021. So get those comments in early so you don't miss the opportunity to get that make these decisions. And again, I want to thank you very much for having us this afternoon, or this evening rather. We look forward to answering as many questions as we can in the next segment. Thank you very much.
Thank you. For those of you just joining us, welcome to this virtual public information open house for the I-285 Westside Express Lanes project. We will now start the live Q&A portion of this event. Please submit your questions using the Microsoft Teams live Q&A chat box. As a reminder, we urge you to keep your questions concise and specific to this project. Also, please use appropriate language. Keep in mind that we may group similar questions together. If we don't get to your question, or the question involves a more detailed technical response than we're able to provide during this time frame, don't worry. We will address your question either within 48 hours or through our comment response letter. Also, we urge you to provide your name when submitting a question. We will begin adding questions to the chat box and answering those questions one at a time. Also, you may receive a private response depending on the question asked. Please note that all comments submitted will be part of the public record. Because this is a virtual open house, it's important that you're tethered to a strong Wi-Fi or reliable wired connection. A recording of this session will be posted on the website below by Thursday, February 18th. And again, if there are any elected officials joining us tonight, please send us your name and office in the chat for our records. This platform provides closed captioning. Click on the three dots if you wish to select closed captioning. For our Spanish-speaking communities, we have a dedicated hotline available at 470-588-0276. And now let's get to our first question. So it looks like we've got two questions that are very similar, so I'll read them as one. Are you taking homes, and if so, which? And are you taking land, and if so, where? Tim?
Thanks, Shane. Again, it's a pleasure to be with you guys this evening. We'll try to get these questions answered as best we can. The question is, are we going to need right-of-way or land to build this project? Yes, the answer is we will need some property, and we will purchase that property through our right-of-way acquisition process. Again, those details are outlined on the website I mentioned earlier, so you'll be able to see exactly how that process works. I'm not sure. I think I'll leave it to Ryan to answer if we are showing any proposed residential displacements. There may be a couple, but remember, we're in early design phase. We're trying to find ways to mitigate those if we can. And if we can't, trust me, you will be notified appropriately and work through the process. So Ryan, can you answer if we have any potential displacements to date?
Yes, thanks, Tim. If you were to go out onto the PIOH website, is a link that goes to our concept design roll plots. Those roll plots do show what we currently believe would be right-of-way needs, easement needs, and then potential relocations. So those are indicated on those design layouts. There are going to be, we do currently have proposed some residential relocations where we would potentially need to purchase the entire property or displace the residents. As to where, I mean, there are right-of-way acquisition needs up and down the corridor. So it's going to be along the entire corridor in certain places that we will need property acquisition. So the best place to see what may be necessary in your area would be to look at those concept roll plots. Thanks for your question.
Thanks, Ryan. So let's get to our next question. Has access in and out of the express lanes from Donnelly Hollowell been considered as part of this project? Tim?
So yes, actually that is the entrance and exit point on the southern side of I-285 for the express lanes. So if you're traveling north from I-20 and on 285 and you want to enter the express lanes, that access point, which is a direct merge, you'll be able to merge right from the general purpose lanes into the express lanes at Donnelly Hollowell Parkway. And you'll be able to travel north in the express lanes if you choose to do so. If you're in the express lanes already traveling south from 75, that's the exit point for the express lanes. So the express lanes end at that location, so you'll be able to enter and exit if you choose to get into the system.
Great, thanks, Tim. So let's get to our next question. Just 2 or 3 years ago, the DOT finally put the noise wall up at 285 Paces Ferry area after promising it would be up 20 years prior. Is that wall going to be taken down? The wall caused a lot of damages to the homes in Orchard Gate. What will now happen to those homes? I used to live in that neighborhood and I know the people still living there. I'm also a realtor. Tim?
Thanks, Shane. Again, you can see exactly what the layout looks like online. Per Ryan earlier, the website shows the layouts, concept drawings on what the potential need for right-of-way is. If we do, in fact, impact an existing noise wall, we still have to do a noise study on this project, even if there's noise walls out there that may cause us to change the location of a noise wall, raise the height of a noise wall, etc. So through the noise analysis process in the NEPA document, that helps us understand what the noise impacts are and whether there's justification for a wall if there's not a wall there, or if we have to relocate a wall because of our construction and change the dimensions, either length or height, because of the new noise study. So all that information about noise and noise analysis can be found on the website as far as the process is concerned. There's a virtual room that walks you through how that works, and you'll be able to see that information there. Now, again, the final noise study is not done yet. So until that study's done, you're not going to be able to see the results on the website until we've published it. But the process itself, once that virtual room is open, you'll be able to see how that process works. But we'll stay engaged in the process, and as we move the project forward, you'll be able to see the outcome of that noise study and ultimately how that noise process works.
Great, thanks, Tim. Let's get to our next question, please. Wasn't that bridge replaced in 2016 at Orchard Road? Tim?
Thanks. I'll let Ryan answer this. He may have a little bit more information than I do on the history of that bridge. Ryan, can you speak to that?
Sure, Tim. That bridge was replaced as part of the Atlanta Road reconstruction project. So it was recently replaced. I think it was constructed as indicated in 2016. Our project team did look at evaluating alternatives to retain that bridge. Unfortunately, they would be more impactful to the properties either side of the interstate in that location if we were to retain the bridge. So ultimately, it was sort of has been decided that it would be more cost effective and less impactful to go ahead and replace the bridge again. Please keep in mind that construction on this project isn't slated to begin until 2026. So that bridge will have been in place for at least a decade at that point, and it may not get constructed at the early part of the project. So thank you for your question.
Thanks, Ryan. All right, so let's get to our next question, please. I-285 is a busy freight corridor. Has the impact on freight mobility been considered as part of this project? Tim?
Thanks. So actually, the state has done a freight and logistics study across the entire state. And we do recognize that this corridor of 285 is a major freight corridor, including 75, I-20, and 85, because trucks are not allowed through downtown Atlanta unless there's local deliveries. But what we're finding, especially in our areas where we have express lanes, is the trucking industry is receiving a huge benefit when it comes to travel times and impacts to their delivery routes. And what I mean by that is when we move vehicles into the express lanes, or the people choose to get into the express lanes, it's freeing up capacity or space on the general purpose lanes, which allows the trucks to get reliable trip times to the extent possible. And we're seeing that on I-75. Once we open a Northwest Corridor project, like I mentioned earlier, the speeds up in the general purpose lanes are up, 20 miles per hour on the general purpose lane. So we're seeing right away that the trucking industry is going to receive a huge benefit when we open the express lanes moving forward. But the state does understand freight and logistics and the movements that are on these most congested corridors, and we believe these projects are the right solution to help in all cases. Thanks for your question.
Thanks, Tim. Let's go to our next question, please. Will the Orchard Gate Bridge be removed, renovated, or remain as is? Tim?
I'll hand that over to Ryan. He can give you details on that.
Thanks, Tim. I'm assuming that the Orchard Gate Bridge means the Orchard Road Bridge. That's, I think, immediately adjacent to the Orchard Gate subdivision. So as mentioned previously, that we are currently proposing to replace that bridge again. As I stated before, we looked at alternatives to try and retain that bridge, but they were all much more impactful from a property and impact standpoint along that area. So the current plan is that we would be replacing the Orchard Road Bridge. Thank you for your question.
Thank you, Ryan. So let's get to our next question. Will the Peach Pass be required to access express lanes, or will there be toll booths? I'll hand that to Tim.
Thanks. That's a great question. This is not a traditional toll facility like you see in other states, or like we had on Georgia 400 inside of 285, where you had to pass through a booth and drop some quarters into the machine to get through. This is actually electronic tolling, and moving forward, all of our express lanes will have electronic tolling. So there's going to be gantries or structures out there over the roadway that have a electronic device that picks up a tag in your car, and it's called a Peach Pass. So you will have to have a Peach Pass to enter the express lane for any location that we have an access point, and you can get out of the express lane at those locations as well. If you do not have a Peach Pass and you do get into the express lane, then the cameras will pick up the vehicle without the pass, and they will send a friendly a letter to you in the mail, and there will be a fine associated with that. So that's how the express lanes work. It's an electronic system, so all you have to do is put that that tag in your car, and it picks you up if you get into the express lanes.
Great, thank you, Tim. So let's get to our next question, please. What will prevent GP or general purpose drivers from using the express lane access points, such as Mount Wilkinson Road, to get on the interstate? Tim?
That's a great question, and that's something that we understand could be a potential concern. We have other express lane projects that are very similar to this. They have access points like you see on the video earlier and on the layouts. And it's all about signage and education. Our goal, and that's just not just with express lanes, but that's with every transportation project we do, is to help folks understand how these systems work. There's a website dedicated to express lanes and how that works, and also signage on the roadway. And so you'll be able to easily determine whether or not that is an express lane access point or not in doing so. So it's all about education, signage, and making sure we got the right signs in the right locations. And through this process that we're having tonight and moving forward, helping folks understand the project, how it works, where these locations are at. And the State Road and Tollway Authority is actually a partner, as I mentioned earlier, to help us manage the express lanes. They actually manage the tolling aspect of the facilities. They set the toll rates based on demand or the number of vehicles in the corridor. So they have a lot of information on their website to help folks understand how these systems work, and including where the access points are and so on.
Great, thank you, Tim. So let's get to our next question, please. There seems to be an encroachment of easements on Gates Walk Drive and Gates Walk Way that destroy several lots and doesn't seem to be necessary to add one lane. There seems to be plenty of room to add a lane from the current road to the sound wall. Tim?
Thanks again. I'll touch on this a little bit and I'll hand it over to Ryan. Looks can be deceiving when you look at the 2D rendering of the drawing online, so it's really difficult to see how the tie-in points may fall. You could have a slope that goes up pretty high or a slope that goes down pretty low, which causes us to push our limits out further than you may see just on the 2D drawing. But I'll let Ryan talk about this location in particular if he has some information.
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, as Tim had indicated, just one lane widening doesn't sound like much, but due to the topography in the area, the slopes are fairly steep between that neighborhood and the existing roadway. So retaining walls will be necessary, things like that. And the construction of those requires, some area. I will say that, what is shown on the concept layouts to date, and this is still fairly early design. So we will continue to refine those, and ultimately the impacts may be less than that. Some parcels we may not need as much or any easement or right of way. This is sort of the early pass at the level of design that we're at. So that's why we're showing some of those easements on those properties. Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan. Let's get to our next question, please. Why are hot lanes considered for this project? It seems like those would have the same benefits as express lanes, but with the added benefit of promoting carpooling. Also, why are physically separated express lanes not shown in the concept? Tim?
Well, that's a great question. There's several parts to that question I'll try to tackle, and I'll start with the last one. Why are physically separated express lanes not shown in the concept? These are physically separated express lanes by a buffer. There's a 2-foot buffer between the general purpose lane and the express lanes. In order to reduce impact on this corridor, we felt like adding the buffer, just a stripe buffer versus a barrier wall, was most appropriate here. Once you add that barrier wall, you have to add additional feet between the barrier wall and each of the lanes, the express lanes and the general purpose lanes. So that widens the footprint out. So in order to reduce environmental impacts to right of way, commercial or residential, we felt the buffer here was appropriate. Why are we considering hot lanes here? These aren't hot lanes. There's a category of called managed lanes, which houses different types of managed lanes or express lanes, and hot lane is a type of express lane or managed lane. A hot lane is what we did on I-85 up in Gwinnett County, DeKalb and Gwinnett County going north. That's hot lane is a high occupancy toll lane where you've taken a lane away that was there as a general purpose lane in the past and made it an express lane. These are all just true express lanes where we're not taking a lane away. We're just building a new lane on the outside, shifting all the general purpose lanes over to add that express lane on the inside. So this is just considered a managed lane of express lanes. And the benefits are what we talked about earlier, is you have the ability to choose to get into the system to get that reliable trip times. And we've seen great success on our existing express lanes. And why are we choosing express lanes over HOV lanes? As I mentioned in our studies that we've done over the past decade, we found that folks just don't want to pile in a lot of folks into one car. They're still just going to get into their own vehicle, and that causes congestion. So providing that choice through express lanes seems to be the right approach, and we've seen proven in the open express lanes out there that is working versus adding an HOV lane and or widening the general purpose facility.
Great. Thank you, Tim. Let's get to our next question. How can we obtain information as to how much land will be taken? It's difficult to assess from the online plans. Tim?
Well, if you look at the plans, anywhere we believe we need some sort of property or easement to build the roadway, you'll see a red line on the outer edge. That's the outer edge that we believe we need right now in the earliest concept drawings for potential need of property to build the project. They're scaled plans. You can actually run a scale across there to see exactly what the number of feet are. But until we actually do a true assessment, a right-of-way assessment on that property, we don't know exactly what the true impact is. There may be existing utilities under there that have to be relocated, et cetera. So until we do that full impact, we can't tell you exactly what the outcome of that right-of-way need is going to be. What you see today is an initial preliminary look at what we think we need, and as we move the project forward, you will definitely be able to see what the impact is and what the actual need is going to be as we move the plans forward.
Great, thank you, Tim. Let's go to our next question, please. We have a gentleman who identifies himself as Edison. He lives in the Orchard Gate residential subdivision. He says his house is in the right of way and noise is already an issue. What is being planned to offset the impact of this project will have on further increasing noise? Tim?
Great question. As I mentioned earlier, all of our projects, not just this one, every transportation project we do in the state requires us to do a noise analysis on our projects, and that helps us evaluate what the future traffic is going to be based on how the noise will be projected. So do that noise analysis. You'll be able to see exactly what the impacts are and what the mitigation strategies may be, such as noise walls and where those may be. So I'll turn this over to Miles Kemp. He's our environmental noise analysis expert, and he can walk you through a little bit of that process. It's a big process, but he can give you an understanding of how that works. Miles?
Thank you, Tim. And again, this is Miles Kemp with the Georgia Department of Transportation's Office of Environmental Services. I'm actually in the air and noise section as the section manager. Tim has already given a great overview of what the process ultimately requires for a noise analysis. But to add some further details, as Tim had mentioned, it is completed under the General Environmental, or NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act process. And as part of that process, we do consider what the existing sound levels are, but ultimately our goal for the project analysis is to assess whether or not the proposed project may actually either increase traffic noise, change levels, might affect existing noise barriers, or may ultimately require the consideration of new barriers in areas that do not currently have them. As part of that process, we do take noise measurements throughout the corridor. We do not look at each and every location to take physical measurements. Part of the process, both for the GDOT noise policy as well as the federal noise regulations, require us to project future traffic growth with the construction of the proposed project to ultimately assess what those traffic noise levels might be in the future. And as part of that, we undergo a series of noise modeling per the federally required process to ultimately establish where noise impacts may occur. We consider residential properties, churches, schools, resources of that nature that may be considered to be noise sensitive. Once we have those results, again, for that, I guess, scenario with the proposed project in the future with traffic increased, we would establish which resources might be impacted by traffic noise and thus ultimately in need of consideration for noise abatement. Now, noise abatement typically would, I guess, consist of noise barrier consideration. And as many of you already may know, there are quite a few existing noise barriers throughout the corridor. As Tim had also mentioned previously, that noise assessment is ultimately assessing whether or not the location of those existing barriers may be impacted by the construction of the project or purely by the potentially increased sound levels due to the construction of the project. So we are assessing the performance of those existing barriers as well. And ultimately, if we find that those existing barriers may not quite meet our requirements or thresholds, they're not benefiting the properties that they were protecting previously, then we may have to replace those barriers, extend them. It's possible, but again, we do not have that noise assessment complete just at this time. And we will have further updates on that in the future once the environmental process moves a little bit further out. Thank you, Tim.
Great, thank you, Miles. Before we get to our next question, I know we're getting a number of questions from folks in the Orchard Gate subdivision. We would like to schedule a meeting with those folks in the next few months. If we could get some contact information, we will reach out to you to schedule a stakeholder meeting. So let's get to our next question. Okay, so we do have someone else from Orchard Gate. I live in Orchard Gate. And after you have decided on the plans, what are you going to do if the plans actually damage our homes? Tim?
Thanks again, Shane. As I mentioned earlier, I'll turn it over to Phil in just a second, but we have a right-of-way acquisition process if we find that we need property from any individual on the corridor, and that could be a residential or commercial property. We go through a right-of-way acquisition process. So Phil, can you give them a walkthrough of how that process works?
Good evening. I'm Phil Copeland. I'm assisting on this project with the right-of-way acquisition needs. And as Tim explained, if you go to the virtual room, there is a tab labeled Property Acquisitions. And inside that virtual room, you will find two very important and useful documents. The first one is the right-of-way brochure that Tim outlined earlier in his presentation that kind of walks you through the process of appraising the property, meeting with the property owner, and making an offer of fair market value to purchase the property. Also in that room is the acquisition process that outlines roughly the 4 to 5 steps that we go through in acquiring property. And the first is the pre-acquisition, where we perform an appraisal report, meet with the property owner, go over a detailed set of plans that would show the exact square footage that is needed and where those lines fall within your property boundaries. And then after the appraisal report is completed and reviewed by the department, an offer is made to purchase that property through the negotiation process. And after an agreement has been reached with the property owner, we go to a closing, just like you would on a typical real estate transaction. And again, you'll look at the timeline associated with those activities, and it takes anywhere from 9 months to a year to start that process and conclude it. So it's not a process that moves very quickly. You'll have plenty of times to process and understand the right-of-way impact and how the compensation was assessed. Thank you very much for your question.
Thank you, Phil. Let's call up our next question, please. Have you considered reevaluating traffic patterns given our new normal? Many employees are working remotely due to COVID, and many employers will continue to operate in this capacity even when businesses return to normal due to the impact on operating costs. Tim?
Sure. Sorry about that. I couldn't get off mute quick enough. So basically, when it comes to the existing situation with COVID and the emergency declaration out there, a lot of people are working from home, and we recognize that. But believe it or not, mid last year after the pandemic started, we found that by July, August, traffic was starting to get back to about 90% of its original demand or capacity on the corridors out there. So right away, even though people are working from home, the travel patterns are still out there, whether they're going to work or whether they're going to another destination, no matter what. And even today, we're seeing about capacity about 95% of what it was before COVID. So we believe, even though the patterns and how people are operating are different, and some people are working from home and probably will be moving forward permanently, that the demand out there is still going to be needed, and the express lanes are going to provide that solution for the congestion that still does happen. I was downtown, I guess last week for a private meeting, and downtown connector was just as congested as it was before COVID. So we're seeing it happen in real time, and that's today's traffic. As we mentioned earlier, we project these traffic analysis for about 20 years out. We look at the existing numbers, project out 20 years, and that'll give us the idea of what the future numbers are going to look like. So we believe the traffic's still going to grow. We're still going to have increased demand on these corridors. And if you look at Atlanta Regional Commission's, our MPO here in Atlanta, the future model on how population growth, there's going to be a huge population growth here in Atlanta. So that's only going to add to the vehicles that we're already projecting. So it's a great question. And we constantly analyze those statistics and understand what's needed from a transportation solution perspective. But what we're seeing right now is there's still a need for it. And really because we look into the future to find out what that need is. Because we don't want to build a project today with existing traffic today and it fail a year or two from now. We want to look to the future on what that demand is so that we can have a project that has a longer life than what you would see otherwise. Great question, though.
Thanks, Tim. Let's get to our next question, please. So this is a question that we had before, Tim, but the gentleman, I'll read it to you. Why are hot lanes not considered for this project? It seems like those would have the same benefit as express lanes with the added benefit of promoting carpooling. So it's supposed to be, why are hot lanes not considered for this project?
That's a great question, and I invite you to go up on I-85 on its busiest hours of the day, and that'll kind of help you understand why hot lanes don't necessarily work in any given situation. Once you have a hot lane in place, you still have to have a peach pass to get into the system, but if you have more than 3 people in your car, then you are allowed to get into that system for free. And what that does is add more vehicles to the system, and you can't control that from a congestion-based pricing perspective. In other words, you can't control really how many vehicles get in the system, which causes more congestion. If we have an express lane like we're proposing here and have proposed in other areas, then that allows for us to control the demand in the corridor to guarantee folks are going to get reliable trip times in these corridors. So we can't guarantee that in a hot lane system, and that's not what we're trying to do. We want to help folks guarantee the ability to get through these corridors in a timely fashion at any given point in the day. And again, that demand in the corridor helps us regulate the price, because the more vehicles in the system and the slower the speeds, the higher the price. The less vehicles in the system, the higher the speeds, the lower the price. So we believe this model is best for these corridors as they are our most congested corridors. But that's a great question.
Thank you, Tim. Let's get to the next question, please. Where can traffic from Dl Hollowell or Donnelly Hollowell get into the express lanes? Tim?
I'll turn that over to Ryan. He can give you an example, and you may want to pull up a layout, Ryan. I don't know if you have the ability to do that.
I do have the layouts. Let's see if I can share my screen. So from Dl Hollowell, well, going to or from Dl Hollowell, The closest point to that interchange that we are proposing an access point is just south of the Chattahoochee River. Let me see if I can share my screen. I'm going to mess you up, Shane.
Rachel, if you can share that content you've got already loaded up for Ryan there.
Okay. So I see it now. So from Dl Hollowell, which is the interchange sort of on the left side of the layout here, the closest point, access point, which we are currently proposing to the express lanes and Dl Hollowell is just south of the Chattahoochee River, which is sort of that, you can see the river on the right side of the layout. So that, I believe it's probably about 1.5 miles from the Dl Hollowell interchange. That would be the access point. So you'd enter from Dl Hollowell. You'd have to merge across the general purpose lanes, and then there's a direct merge, which is basically sort of a skip stripe, and it gives travelers the opportunity to get from the GP lanes into the express lanes or vice versa. So going northbound, that would be your opportunity to enter the express lane system. If you're coming southbound in the express lane system, there is also that same direct merge on right there at the Chattahoochee River. So you'd be able to exit the express lane system and then merge across the general purpose lanes to access Dl Hollowell. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. Let's call up our next question, please. Will this project impact or improve I-285 southbound access to I-20 West, which is the biggest bottleneck on the Westside 285? Tim?
Thanks. Excellent question. As you can see, we've demonstrated the express lane project actually stops just north of I-20. However, as a part of this major mobility investment program that this project also falls under, we have an interchange and reconstruction project that's underway as well in the early concept phase that will reconstruct I-20 and I-285 there at that location. So you're going to see new ramp configurations. One of the biggest problems in that area is vehicles traveling south on 285 to west on 20. There's a pretty big steep grade there as you go from 285 to I-20 on that ramp, and trucks don't like steep grades, right? So what we're trying to do is correct some of those things. We're also doing some work on I-20 proper with some collector distributor lanes, basically giving access to the interchanges and access points past the interchange there, dedicated lane, so you don't have to mix with the general purpose through traffic. So that's a separate project that's in concept development right now, and will be actually under construction about the same time this project is, or just before anyway. Actually, it'll be done just before the express lane project. So it's a separate project to fix that congestion area as well. Now, we also have a future planned project that's programmed. It's not funded yet, but it is programmed to take express lanes from this project on the west side down to the interchange at I-285 and 20 and take you out I-20 for a good ways. So you will see express lanes in the future on I-285 down to I-20 and out west on I-20 as well. So more to come. We recognize there's other problems out there too, and we try to tackle them as quickly as we can. Great question.
Thank you, Tim. Let's call up our next question, please. So this question is also from the Orchard Gate subdivision. We are homeowners in Orchard Gate directly backing up to 285, and our property will be affected by the current proposed right-of-way. Can you provide more detail about how much property will be needed and how that affects the sound wall directly behind our home? Tim?
Thanks. As I mentioned earlier, we only have an early indication of what the property needs are, right-of-way acquisition needs are for this project. And if you go to the website on those layouts, you'll be able to see that red line on the outside if we actually need right-of-way on this corridor, if we've highlighted that. And that'll give you an indication now whether or not we're actually touching your property or not. What the actual impact and need is going to be, we don't know that yet until we further advance the concept line and design of the project. And once we determine and feel comfortable that we understand what the impact of that right-of-way need is, then that's when we start the acquisition process. Some of the right-of-way is going to, and the property is going to be purchased before we go to construction, and some of the right-of-way is going to be purchased after we go to construction, because these are design build projects where a design builder developer comes in and do the final design after we get a developer on board. So I say stay tuned, stay engaged, and keep track of the project on this website. You'll be able to see as the project advances exactly what the needs are from a right-of-way perspective. And again, once we determine that you are impacted, whether it's just a couple of feet of right-of-way that's needed, or the whole property is needed, we'll let you know that, and you will be communicated with. And ultimately, through, as Phil mentioned earlier, through the right-of-way acquisition process, if we need property, then we will reach out to you and start that process. And just like a normal real estate transaction, would make an offer for that property that's needed, whether it's a little bit or the whole property. And then that process will begin once we're prepared to do so. But right now it's early, so stay tuned, and we'll help you understand the process, especially if you're impacted from a right-of-way perspective moving forward.
Thank you, Tim. Let's go to our next question, please. Okay, is there enough space along the Orchard Gate subdivision to keep the current sound barrier using a retaining wall and thus avoiding, I'm guessing this is taking, any backyard properties? Tim?
Sure. It's definitely, anytime you can mitigate, impacts to property that we don't currently own as a department, we're going to try to do that. Sometimes cost outweigh, a cost of a wall sometimes is a lot more expensive than 2 or 3 or 5 feet of right of way. But we have to do an assessment to make sure that we understand what the impact is, what the potential solutions may be. And that's all through the design process. And as we move forward, if we find that, hey, let's build a wall here because, one, we can stay off a residential property, and it's relatively cost effective, then that's the solution we may go with. But the reason we have these meetings this evening is to get that feedback, to understand, what the impacts to you are as a citizen and homeowners on these corridors, and ultimately take that back and evaluate it in the environmental process, but also evaluate it in the design process. We have lots of engineers working on that. Ryan, you heard from earlier, is our lead engineer on this project. So he takes that information and does an analysis and determination to find out what the best solution is to try to avoid. That's our first goal. And in the environmental process, if we can avoid, that's what we're going to do. But to the extent we cannot avoid impacts to property that we don't own, then we have to go through the evaluation process, both environmentally, design, engineering wise, as well as right of way wise as well. So just stay tuned on the project. If we can get off, we're going to. If we can't, then you'll see that progress move forward. And ultimately, if we need property, you'll be contacted appropriately. Great question.
Thank you, Tim. Let's move on to our next question, please. Okay, can you narrow down the time frame for home acquisition? Early 2022, 3 years, 5 years, or 8 years? Tim?
Sure, great question. I'm going to let Phil kind of give you an indication of what we're doing right now as far as early acquisition is concerned, and then I'll wrap it up with kind of the timeline on how things work from a design build perspective. So, Phil?
Sure, Tim. As Tim mentioned earlier, the environmental process will be completed in the fall of 2022, which is typically the time that right-of-way acquisition engages in its most active acquisitions. However, there are opportunities along these corridors for us to perform what we call early acquisitions, and that is properties that may be currently up for redevelopment, properties that may currently be up for sale, and we have the opportunity to buy it while it's up for sale so that the seller can move forward with selling the remaining property and the buyer can move forward with utilizing it without the future impact of the roadway. And then the most important part of early acquisition is, like Tim said, these are design build projects. We are just now in the preliminary concept of the project, so we don't know exactly what that footprint's going to be. So we have to let the design progress to a point that we are comfortable that we're buying enough right of way. We're not buying too much right of way so that we don't impact the property more than is necessary, and we've had the opportunity to mitigate and minimize those acquisitions.
Great. Great. Thank you, Phil. Let's get to our next question, please. Oh, go ahead, Tim.
So yeah, Shane, just to follow up, as I mentioned earlier, what property does not, if we do not purchase a property early and we get to the final design phase, which is when a developer's on board, then there's another series of acquisitions that has to take place if we didn't buy it early. And the same process is followed then. There's just a better understanding of exactly what the final design is going to look like. So we believe, as I mentioned earlier, that the timeline of this project is to get to construction in 2026. So if we haven't purchased any property between now and 2026, any property that is left to be purchased will be purchased after that construction starts. And actually after the final design starts, excuse me. So once the final design is done, which takes about a 6 to 9 month period after we award this project to a contractor, after that 9 month period of final design, and during that period, they will be able to purchase the remaining right of way. They can't build anything unless we own the right of way as far as the department is concerned. So keep that in mind. No construction activity can take place on any private property. We have to purchase that property first. So I know it seems like a long way out, but it gets here fast. So stay engaged, and you'll learn as the project moves forward exactly what those impacts are. So thanks.
Thank you, Tim. So let's get to our next question, please. Okay, we have someone from Orchard Gate again. As I look at the concept roll plots, I live in Orchard Gate. My property isn't even listed. Rachel, if you could zoom in on the concept layouts when I send it over to Tim, that would be great. Tim?
Sure. So obviously, we don't identify every single parcel along the corridor because some are far enough off of the interstate and the potential need for the project design that we don't identify those. It may be in the future that we may have to identify. It just depends on where the location of that property is. I'll let Ryan, if he has an indication of what that may look like here in this case, but just because we haven't labeled it, doesn't mean you're not necessarily impacted. But we do recognize if there's a potential impact, we definitely want to recognize those properties and we label them accordingly. So if you're not labeled today, then that means there's probably not identified potential impact necessary for this project. But Ryan, do you want to add any more to that?
Sure, Tim. I'm actually going to share my screen because I have a layout that's probably a little more detailed than what is, let's see, screen one. So I know there's been a lot of questions on the Orchard Gate subdivision, which is right here off of just off of Orchard Road, immediately adjacent to 285. So here on the project layouts, we have a number of parcels and property owners. They have numbers and the owners that we have listed for those properties. If your name is shown here, it means that based on our concept design, and this is still very, very preliminary, we indicate that we may need some property, either required right of way, which is purchasing the property from the property owner, or construction easement, or permanent easement sometimes. So the green here is what we consider permanent easement. And so that the property in that case, it's still owned by the property owner, but GDOT purchases the right to access that property, which can be done, just for construction, maintenance of slopes. It could be something to do with drainage, or any number of items that the DOT may need to get back in there and do something in that area. And so they purchase the right to access that, but don't actually take the control of the property from the owner. This red line here, and I may switch to a different sheet for this neighborhood, which may show a little bit more information. So the red line here would indicate what we think we may need as right-of-way, which is actually purchasing property from the homeowner sort of permanently. So it's the homeowner wouldn't own it anymore. The Georgia DOT would consider that their right-of-way. And then on these layouts, so that's the difference, when you're looking at these, the red line indicates what DOT may purchase, the green indicates what the DOT may acquire access to. And then you'll sometimes see these little red dots, and those are listed as potential relocations. So those are locations where we feel like the impact may be to the structure itself, or maybe the impacts are something that would no longer deem that structure to be usable. Sometimes that's things as simple as no longer having access or circulation around the property. And so that's what those red dots are. And all of those are on, these layouts are all on the website. Actually, I can show you where you can get to them since there's been a number of questions. So this is the website, and there's a little link right up here at the top called Concept Design in the banner. And that will bring you to this page, and each one of those layouts are located here. So you can click that and it will load that drawing that I was just sharing. The resolution, unfortunately, because it's online, isn't quite as good as what I'm able to pull up since we created these. But this is the exact same drawing I was just showing you, and it's actually pretty good. So that's what those items are. And just to reiterate, this is early in the design. This is we're going through concept and our preliminary design right now. So these are likely to change as we refine the design in these areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. Okay, so let's get to our next question, please. Following up to my earlier question, in other places like Northern Virginia, express lanes were added to highways, which are managed and tolled lanes, just like this concept with the ability for HOV vehicles to use these lanes for free. This HOV option promotes carpooling and rewards those carpools by allowing them to ride in the lane for free. Are you familiar with those types of managed systems, and were similar concepts considered in the planning phase? Tim?
Yeah, so trying to get off mute there. So when it comes to allowing HOV users in the system, it goes back to my earlier point that it turns into a hot lane facility. And what we're finding is you get results at certain times of the day on a hot facility, but during our most peak travel times, you do not get results in a hot type facility, especially with quarters like these where the demand is so high. So we would not want to put HOV allowed vehicles in the system because it ends up being that hot +3, which is a vehicle that has 3 or more people in it can get in the system for free. Because I said earlier, we can't control that number of vehicles that get in if they have those numbers in their car. I do recognize that HOV lanes are important, and we have them in Georgia. As we looked at our study back in the early 2000s, we recognized that the adding HOV lanes on other corridors in the metro area did not prove positive for us. So as we looked at alternatives throughout the last decade, we found that express lanes, this type of express lanes, which is basically everybody pays to get into the system, unless you're in a transit service provider or a registered van pool. There are registered van pools that can get into the system for free. Now, you still have to pay to get into the registered van pool service, but you don't have to pay a second time to get into the express lanes. And transit service providers do not have to pay to get in to the express lanes either. So for those reasons, that's why we're using this type of facility, again, because it allows us to manage the demand in the corridor to provide what we're guaranteeing. That's a reliable trip time for all users who choose to get into the system. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. All right, let's get to our next question. Okay, what will the toll fees be used for? Tim?
Sorry. So the toll fees that are generated from the folks who choose to get into the system is going to be used to operate the facility. There's a lot of effort to operate these facilities. We have what we call toll integrators, and they manage the facility once it's open to traffic. They set the toll rates based on the number of vehicles in the system, based on the speeds in the systems, and all the fees that are collected from that that service will go back into the system itself to help manage those day-to-day activities, because there's folks sitting in the back office managing the computers, understanding how the system's working, making adjustments. and also into the maintenance of the facilities as well. And the facility being the tolling infrastructure facility, all that electronic equipment that's out there has to be maintained. So that's where the funding is going back to the project. And if there's any funding left over after all those things, then they're going to help pay back the cost of the project itself. These are pretty expensive projects, you know, just south of $1 billion in most cases. And we don't have $1 billion on hand for these projects, so that we're financing these projects over time, so we can bring these solutions earlier for you today, so you can get the benefits without having to wait 15, 20, or 30 years for us to pay these all up front. So that's where the money's going once it's collected, for all the operations, maintenance, and then, if possible, paying back some of the financing on the project.
Great. Thank you, Tim. Let's get to our next question, please. Okay, so has an on-off ramp been considered for Dl Hollowell or Donnelly Hollowell? Will it be studied in the I-20 interchange? Tim?
That's a great question. I think that interchange exists today as a general purpose interchange, right, Ryan? So what that means is we don't want to mix express lane access with general purpose access. I think there was a point made earlier, is what kind of confusion will you have if you have general purpose and express lanes mixed together? And we believe this serious confusion is going to happen. So our goal and our policy for tolling and express lanes is not to mix general purpose interchange traffic with the express lane access traffic. So that's why you're not going to see an express lane access point at that location. As we move the future express lane project forward that goes further south on I-20, we will look then at what's needed from an access point, whether it's a direct merge or a separate interchange may be needed in that location, depending on how that system would work moving forward into the future. So the main reason is we don't think it's safe to mix those two together because of confusion, and our policy as a whole is not to do that.
Great. Thank you, Tim. All right, let's get to our next question. Will the design process be completed? Tim?
Sure. So the design process is not going to be completed until probably about, late 2026, I would suspect, once we get a developer on board. As a part of the design build process, we do, I say we being the department, Georgia Department of Transportation, and our consultant engineers actually design this project up to about 30% plan development, just enough so we know what the environmental impacts are, what the potential right-of-way needs are based on that 30% costing plan development. And then that gives us the ability to show the developer what they're going to bid on. And once we have all that package done, which will be, in late 2023, but because of the financial model and where this project falls in the funding strategy, we're not going to bring it to construction or actual final design until 2026, early first part of 2026. So the final design will be done that first year of 2026, and then once the final design is done, then they'll move into construction with the open to traffic in 2032.
Okay, thanks, Tim. Let's get to our next question, please. Is an express lane for a few miles really going to make much difference, or is this part of a larger plan? Do you have comparisons for how traffic could improve? Tim?
That's an excellent question, and it is part of a bigger plan. As I showed you earlier in the slides presentation, this is a part of a larger network. If you have traveled on our roadways and anytime in the past 20 years, you've seen traffic volumes increase to the point where 3 or 4 hours, both morning and afternoon, traffic is almost gridlocked on I-285, on I-75, I-85, as well as State Route 400. So we believe this broader regional approach to solving congestion on our most congested corridors is the right way to go. And as I mentioned earlier, there is a future project to take you out down to I-20 and out I-20 West for express lanes there as well. So this is just the beginning. We believe that this is the right solution for solving these problems. Just as an example, we've widened I-285 many, many times over the past 50 years, to be honest with you. Actually, 285 was 50 years old a couple years ago. We celebrated that anniversary. And it started as a 2-lane facility, and now it's a 6, 7 or so lane facility in each direction. So what we found is widening the roadway, just adding lanes, doesn't solve the problem, because once you widen and add a lane, it just fills up. And once it fills up, people are congested on the interstate, and also they get off the interstate, try to find the path of least resistance on these local networks, which also clogs up the local networks. By adding express lanes, you're providing drivers the choice to get reliable trip times by paying that fee on the express lanes, therefore keeping people off the local networks and also freeing up some capacity on the general purpose lanes as well. So as I mentioned, the study proved that express lanes is the right solution. We've widened 285. It doesn't work, obviously. So we don't think moving forward that's the right solution. So express lanes is where we're headed.
Great, thanks, Tim. Okay, let's get to our next question, please. Do you anticipate any lighting or signage along Spring Hill Parkway for the access point at Mount Wilkinson Parkway? Tim?
That's a great question. I'll turn that over to Ryan. I'm not sure if we've done any final studies as it relates to lighting, but he can give you an idea how that process works.
Yeah, we have not yet done a lighting study. That is part of our design efforts here shortly. So in general, the access points will most likely be illuminated, but we'll be going through that process of determining where lighting is needed and along the project corridor and at those access points here in the near future. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ryan. Let's get to our next question, please. Living in Orchard Gate, if my property isn't listed but is right next to a house that is impacted, how can you conclude that I won't be impacted? My property value will be greatly affected. Will I be compensated for that? Tim?
Actually, I'll turn that right over to Phil.
Thank you, Tim. When you look at the roll plots there in the virtual room, if a property has a proposed right-of-way acquisition, a red line, or a proposed easement acquisition, a green line, there will be a transaction directly between the department and that property owner. Unfortunately, if you're an abutting property to one of those, there will not be a transaction between you and the department for those. The department does not have a mechanism to compensate a property owner unless there is a physical acquisition of an easement or a fee simple right-of-way transaction. Thank you, Tim.
Thanks, Phil.
Great, thank you, Phil. All right, let's get to our next question, please. Okay, when can we have a meeting to determine if the backyards of Orchard Gate can be saved by constructing a retaining wall between the existing sound barrier and the new west lane? Tim?
Sure, I think someone said something earlier about having a dedicated meeting for this association here. So I think stay on the lookout for the potential to have that meeting in the next couple of months. You'll be contacted. If there's a site we can do it in person that gives us social distancing and outdoors preferably, then we may try to do that. But if there's not a site we can find to do that, then what we'll do is hold a virtual meeting for this group. And there we can talk about potential options, what can be done, what we know today can't be done, and what we don't know yet, and we'll have to study further. So stay on the lookout for that, and we'll be contacting this group in the next couple of months.
Great, thank you, Tim. Let's get to our next question, please. When will decisions be made based on the cost of the project, or will protecting homes and land be the priority? Tim?
Well, as we work through the design of the project, we obviously have a budget on what the project's going to cost. And we do look at impacts, as I said earlier, and our number one priority is to avoid new property impacts where we can. Even if it costs us money, we're going to try to do that. Sometimes, the cost outweighs that end up in benefit, if you will. And as far as priority is concerned, that's our priority, is to try to avoid first and protect homes where necessary. Sometimes we can, and sometimes we can't. It just depends on what the engineering tells us and what the environmental impact studies tells us to help make that decision. Again, we try to avoid. Sometimes we can't, and if we can't avoid, then the process is it's a legal process. We go through that process, and you're brought along every step of the way, and you're compensated for that impact, whatever that impact may be, whether it's a small piece of property needed or the entire property needed. And also, if needed, relocated and paid for those costs as well. So, and that's all outlined in the acquisition process online that Phil talked about earlier.
Great, Tim. Thanks. So we are still waiting to get some more questions. It looks like we have another question. Okay, so how will traffic volume and patterns change on Spring Hill Parkway with the access point on Mount Wilkinson Parkway? Tim?
So obviously, when we add an express lane access point, that's going to be the access point for folks who choose to use the system and are coming in that direction from that area. And they're going to, if that's the direction they're coming from and that's the access point they want to use, then obviously that pattern will have those volumes on that roadway to ultimately get you to that access point. What we're finding with express lanes is folks have already made up their mind before they leave the house, to be honest with you, on whether or not they're going to use express lanes. And they already have an idea of the location they want to enter and exit the express lanes. So we believe that's a predictable pattern once it starts, and it's not going to change that often. We're seeing that existing concept on I-285 and 575. We have a couple of access points similar to Mount Wilkinson on I-285, one at Terrell Mill Boulevard and at Roswell Road. And we haven't seen any traffic impacts or huge demand on those local streets just to access these express lanes in those locations. So we believe, it's not going to be a huge impact because, as I said earlier, folks right now are currently using existing general purpose interchanges to get out of the congestion and clogging up local streets. We believe that they're going to stop using those local networks and get in at different locations that they might otherwise to enter the express lanes. And that's going to help the volume issues on these local networks as well. So we're not seeing any concerns on our existing express lanes, and we don't think that we're going to see those concerns here as well.
Thanks, Tim. Okay, so we're still waiting on a few more questions. As we do that, I just want to remind folks that, to submit your questions using the Microsoft Teams live Q&A chat box. Just be sure to keep your questions concise and specific to this project. As Tim mentioned, we will set up meetings with the Orchard Gate subdivision. We will reach out to you within the next couple of months to set up those meetings. As we go through, we will group similar questions together. If we don't get to your question, then don't worry about it. We will address your question either within 48 hours or through our comment response letter. Please note that all comments submitted will be part of the public record. Because this is a virtual open house, it's important that you're tethered to a strong Wi-Fi or reliable wire connection. If you get disconnected, you can always log back into the session. And a recording of this session will be posted on the website listed below by Thursday, February 18th. I know we've had some questions about that, so don't worry, a recording of this will be available. And again, if there are any elected officials joining us tonight, please send us your name and office in the chat for our records. Okay. So do we have any other questions coming in? I see one coming in right now. Is the delivery method for the project a public-private partnership like the 285-400 interchange project? Tim?
Great question, and yes, it is. As I mentioned earlier, this program as a whole is an $11 billion program, and this project itself, is just under $1 billion. So we don't have all that money up front. So what we're doing is bringing in private investment. Those developers is what we call them, and they bring private financing. And we also use other sorts of funds, such as grants. We use bonds and other things to help build these projects, but we will have a public-private partnership with a developer that is going to bring the majority of the funding to help build this project today, so that you can enjoy the benefits of this project without having to wait 20 years or more before we're able to get all the money in the bank. So it is going to be just like 285-400 when it comes to the funding aspect of it.
Okay, thanks, Tim. Do we have another question coming in? Okay. For the properties affected by the proposed right-of-way, what changes to the existing landscaping will take place? Tim?
I'm gonna try to understand that question. For the properties affected, so basically, once we've determined that there's a need to buy property, purchase property from an individual or homeowner, or even a commercial owner for that matter, we have to evaluate what that impact is. And if there's an impact that is greater than just buying property, we have to make an assessment and see how we can cure that impact. Just to give you an example, if there is a piece of property, residential property, that has a fence on the backside of that property, and we impact that fence, then we have to pay for that fence, and potentially up to giving the money to the homeowner so they can replace that fence, or whatever other mechanisms in place there. So I'll let Phil kind of touch on a little bit more of that, but whatever impact is there, we compensate for that impact. So Phil, if you want to go ahead and talk about that.
Sure, Tim. What I take away from that question is what kind of use would we be using the property for? So as we move forward with the planned developments in these areas where we anticipate an acquisition, we will also be able to provide a cross section of that area that shows what the slope may be. What will there be a ditch section in there? Will there be a slope? What do we plan on using that area for? And like Tim said, if there's site improvements located in that area that we're acquiring, we not only compensate for the underlying land, we also compensate for any site improvements, landscaping, fencing that may be in that area. And we also compensate for any consequential damages to the remaining property. Several people have kind of asked some questions about the acquisition and the remaining property. So we do what we call a before and after appraisal report. So if there's any diminution in value to the remaining property, such as the house, because the proximity of the road has come much closer, there is a component in these offers and in the appraisal process to address that diminution in value of the remaining property. Thanks, Tim.
Thank you, Phil.
Yeah, thank you, Phil and Tim. Our next question: how much property has to be taken in order to take a home? Tim?
Phil, I'll let Phil answer that one.
Sounds good.
That's a really tough question to answer. There is no rule of thumb of how much you can acquire before the structure has to be taken and someone relocated. It's all based on the appraisal report. Some markets seem to be more receptive to a closer proximity to a roadway than another. And so it goes through that before and after appraisal process that I was talking about, that you look at what the property's worth in the before situation, and you look at the property as to what it's worth in the after situation. And there very well could become a threshold that once you cross that diminution in value, it is more feasible and economical to go ahead and cause a displacement instead of leaving a right-of-way line within a close proximity to a structure. So there's not a finite rule of thumb. It's not like a setback rule. It's just based on the appraisal and how much a property may suffer a diminution or not. Thanks, Tim.
Thank you, Phil and Tim. Okay, do we have another question? So this is similar to a question we had before. Given the changes in commuter behavior related to COVID-19 and studies indicating businesses will permanently pivot to a virtual working environment, will a revised study be done to determine the necessity of these express lanes? Tim?
Sure. As I mentioned earlier, we're seeing today that traffic is back to about 95% of what it was pre-COVID. So we believe the demand is still there and the need to build these projects are still there. And remember, we're building these projects based on future traffic. We project those numbers out to see what that future demand is going to look like. And that helps us understand what's needed today for that future use. So we believe the need is still there. And even though some folks are going to be permanently working from home, businesses and otherwise, we believe the demand on the roadway itself is probably not going to change because people are going to still access, the areas they want to access. It just may be in different parts of the day versus a period of time that they did before. So we've seen demand back again close to what it was before COVID, and we think it's just going to be even more moving into the future because population is going to grow as well.
Okay, thank you, Tim. Do we have any other questions? Okay. All right. Just a reminder, everyone, we're here till 6, so we would love to field any additional questions that you may have about the I-285 Westside Express Lanes project. So be sure to populate your questions in the chat box so our subject matter experts can answer your questions. And again, those questions that involve a more detailed or technical response than we're able to provide, we will answer within 48 hours, or we will provide a response in the comment response letter. Do we have any other questions coming in? All right. Just as a reminder, if there are any elected officials joining us tonight, please send us your name and office in our chat for our records. Oh, it looks like we have another question coming through. What happens should the foundation of my home be impacted post-construction? Tim?
So I'll let Phil kind of talk about that. Obviously, if we are purchasing property, even if we weren't purchasing property, construction to build these roadways, could potentially cause vibration impacts and so on. So as with our other projects, and I'll give the interchange at 285-400 as an example, there's vibration monitoring set up on those projects to help understand exactly what the vibrations are doing. And the developer has to track those to make sure they don't exceed those levels that are required in the contract, just for that very reason. So we don't want them to carte blanche be able to, have any level of vibration that could potentially impact the neighboring home's foundation or otherwise. So it's monitored during construction. And as long as they don't exceed those levels they're allowed during construction for the project, then they're covered, to be honest with you. And obviously, if something happens after the fact, the property owner has a right to investigate that and determine whether or not it was the impact from the construction or otherwise. So it would be a process that would have to take place through an investigation, I would suspect. But we understand those concerns, and we do vibration monitoring during construction projects as we build them.
All right. Thank you, Tim. Our next question, similar to another question, but when will the design concept be finalized?
Sure. The overall design the overall design concept itself, which is basically what we're doing as a whole. There may be minor tweaks that come after we get a developer on board through the final design process, but the concept itself of building express lanes, one in each direction, and the access locations will pretty much be finalized around the environmental approval, which is Q4 or late 2022. That's when we get the environmental document approved. Any changes after that can be made, but we'll have to go through an environmental reevaluation process. So you shouldn't see a major change on the corridor from a concept perspective. So by then you'll have a good understanding of exactly how this concept's going to lay out.
Great, thank you, Tim. Do we have any other questions coming in? Okay. I live in Orchard Gate, and do we have a say in whether you take land versus take the whole property? It occurs to me that if you just take land, our houses will be destroyed. Tim?
I don't, I'm not scared of answering tough questions, but I will hand that over to Phil because he's an expert on how that process works. So Phil?
As Tim mentioned earlier, we're still early on in the design of this. So we will continue to look for opportunities to mitigate the impacts to the Orchard Gate community. But as I mentioned earlier, unless there is a physical acquisition of either a fee simple acquisition or a permanent easement, there is no mechanism for the department to compensate the other properties within that community, and not just that community, anywhere along a highway project. There has to be a physical acquisition. There are mechanisms that if a property owner feels that they have been unduly impacted, there is a mechanism that they can take an inverse condemnation action against the department, but that is up to them to take that action against the department, and the burden is on them to prove that they are entitled to compensation. Unfortunately, that is the parameters and the laws that we work in Georgia.
And I'll add to that a little bit. For the question was asking if you're taking just a little bit of land, why aren't you taking the whole property? And that goes back to Phil's point earlier. The department is not allowed to buy right away we don't need. That's per state law. So we have to buy what we need and not more. The only time we buy a little bit more than what's needed for the actual construction is to the points that Phil mentioned earlier, is the damage to the remainder is such that the value is not what it, or the impact is too great, is what I should say, if the damage to the remainder. And in that case, we would buy the whole property if the evaluation proves true to that point. And that's the only time that you end up getting a little bit more property than you actually need for construction activities. Otherwise, like I said earlier, we try to avoid and only purchase the right-of-way necessary or easements necessary to construct a project. Otherwise, we can't do more than that.
All right, thank you, Tim. So I don't see any other questions coming in. So if we could call up our last slide, Rachel. Okay. So since that was the last question of this virtual public information house for the I-285 Westside Express Lanes project, we'd like to thank you for your participation. As a reminder, of the recording of this session will be posted on the website listed below by Thursday, February 18th. We want to thank everyone for joining us this evening. Take care and good night. Thank you.